one vein, and then the tools can go through the vein from there. So the catheter is the delivery system that gets the product up there. For an aneurysm, in this case, in this example, it's being treated in two ways. A stent has been inserted. So the stent tries to direct the blood flow by giving a braided tube. So that way the blood stays inside the tube and flows from point A to point B without going into the little bubble that you're trying to avoid. The other part of the treatment is filling the bubble with a coil. And once that bubble is filled in, that prevents blood from flowing in and out of it to potentially make it worse, but it also encourages healing. So if you, in most cases, the best possible outcome is that once you fill it, then the opening will start to gradually close up over time. And the vein will heal itself in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. So before I move on, do you guys have any questions about what the company does or what these products do? Okay, all right. So there's, these are two different types of medical device companies. There's a lot of different medical device companies out there making a whole wide range of products. If your goal is to stay in Orange County, you're actually pretty lucky if you're interested in medical devices. Orange County happens to be one of the largest, if not the largest hub of medical device companies anywhere. There's Medtronic out here. Edwards has a giant campus. The two companies that I've worked for, Johnson & Johnson, Alcon, there's all kinds of different employers and even small startups, medical startups. So there's a lot of opportunities for you if you decide to work in medical devices. But there's, in addition to having a lot of different companies, there's a lot of different roles within those companies. So what I do as a sterilization specialist, I'm not actually in the product design. I'm on the subspecialty of ensuring sterilization. So when you have a medical device that's going to go into a patient's brain or into their hearts or abdomen, wherever, you want to make sure it's absolutely clean. Because if there's any bacterial spores on there that can cause an infection, not only do you have whatever problem you were treating them for, you now have a surgical site infection that makes it even worse. That's the last thing you need for a patient that's already being treated for something else. And it's the most common surgical complication is surgical site infection. I believe it happens to roughly 2 or 3% of all surgical procedures. So it's a big threat. No matter what the device is, every device has different size, shape, different materials. I need to be able to make sure that by the time it goes to market, we can ensure that there's a less than a 1 in a million chance that there's any surviving bacterial spores on there, let alone a dangerous strain of bacteria. So there's two main ways that we do that. One method of sterilization is with radiation. That's what this picture on the left, bottom left is showing. These are boxes of medical devices being irradiated. It's a 3D image. You don't actually see a glowing green light like that. But in radiation sterilization, we actually have a particle accelerator that shoots electrons at 99.7% the speed of light into the medical devices. Those electrons will bounce off of the atoms in the product. And when they bounce, because of conservation of momentum, they generate X-rays. And that radiation destroys the DNA of the bacteria. Um, so some products go through that method. The other method is most commonly used is ethylene oxide gas. The chamber that you see on the bottom right, you can see the person is very small compared to it. That is an ethylene oxide sterilization chamber. They range from the small size chambers that you see on the top to the huge ones that you see on the bottom. And that will allow for the sterilization of an entire truckload of product all at once. And ethylene oxide works by chemically destroying the cell walls of any bacteria that are on the product. And the ethylene oxide is a small enough molecule that it can go through any packaging materials. So even if you have a sterile barrier, it'll go through that and kill the bacteria. So that way, once the gas dissipates, you have a sterile product where nothing else can get onto the product. So it can be safely transported to the hospital. So I think about how to make sure there are no germs on our product all day, every day, for all different kinds of products. And it's a very interesting role because by acting as a subject matter expert that's not assigned to a single product line, no matter what product you're making, it needs to be sterile by the time it reaches the customer. So I'm always involved on every project, just bringing in my specialized knowledge. But as a result, I get to see everything that the company does. If there's an update to an existing product, I need to make sure that doesn't affect our sterilization process. If there's a new product, I need to make sure it fits into one of our current sterilization processes, or I'll help design a new process for it. If there's a regulatory submission because we're going into a new country, you need to have the sterilization certification to go in and sell to a new market. So I work with regulatory teams. It's an interesting position because I get a little slice of everything the company's working on. And just touching upon that, in a medical device industry, or in a medical device company, there's a lot of different roles. If someone tells you that they're an engineer in medical devices, that could mean a lot of things. There are engineers working in R&D. There are engineers working in operations or manufacturing engineering. There are engineers working in quality, engineers on regulatory. So just be open-minded to the variety of different roles that there are working in medical devices. So you have R&D that comes up with crazy ideas for new products. You have both of the companies that I've worked with are large enough to have their own machine shops. So you could be a machinist or a mechanical engineer in the machine shop. Operations team is in charge of actually producing the product, and they have their own manufacturing engineering teams within operations that look at how the manufacturing line is laid out, trying to make sure the steps of the process are validated. Clinical development actually interfaces with the doctors and tries to find out what the needs of the users are, aka the doctors. And often you'll find people with bioengineering backgrounds there because they have kind of a wide view of the engineering concerns, but also the biological concerns and what the doctors need. Regulatory affairs, you can find engineers in regulatory affairs. And quality, I work in quality, but even within quality, there's a lot of different aspects. Quality assurance is what I do. That's looking at less of a part-by-part quality in terms of seeing if things meet specifications, and more of an organizational compliance view. Do we have systems in place to make sure things are good? And what are we doing to maintain that validated state? Quality systems is kind of like the group that looks at the organization as a whole and how it runs. Every company has their own sets of procedures for how they operate, and quality systems are kind of the engineers of the system itself. And that has its own complicated world behind it. So it's almost like lawyering, because you're looking at company documents all day, but with very real world impacts to everything that you write. Quality engineering, R&D teams can just come up with crazy ideas all day, but they're coming up with new ideas. The quality engineers are the ones that make sure it's actually safe and reliable. So sometimes they're at odds with each other. Quality engineers will say, hey, we need to do more testing to make sure that this doesn't rupture when it's inside of a patient's brain. Like, well, I don't have time to test that because I'm in R&D and I'm trying to get this deadline to go to market next week or something. They're looking at things from different perspectives. Or the R&D engineer is usually concerned with, does it work? The quality engineer is concerned with, can we prove it will work every time? And quality control is actually on the manufacturing floor with the manufacturing team, inspecting the parts at each level. So there's a lot going on in a medical device organization. So don't, just because you want to be an engineer at a medical device company doesn't necessarily mean you need to be making drawings and designing the devices. There's a lot beyond that. So just keep your mind open to the possibilities. Speaking of different possibilities, I'm kind of biased because I work in quality, but quality is important. So whether or not you work in quality in the future, you should at least keep it in mind and try to have a quality mindset. And why does that matter? Well, let's take an example. Let's simplify things a bit. Let's say that you're a craftsman making a bicycle from scratch, and a bicycle is made of 100 parts. If you're you're pretty good at what you do, you make parts with 99% defect-free success rate. So, I've been getting into like baking lately. If I could bake 100 cookies and have all 100 come out perfect, that'd be awesome. But if I had 99 good cookies and one burnt cookie, I'd still consider that a pretty successful day of baking. But if I'm building a bike made of 100 parts, that's 100 opportunities for a defect. So can anyone tell me, like, a guess, if the bike's made of 100 parts and each part I make 99% successfully, what's the chance I'll get a perfect bike, no defects? Feel free to just like spitball numbers. 99%, okay, optimistic.
I think it's more like 80%. I don't know.
Okay, 80%. Any other guesses? 85%. Okay, I like the confidence. So if there's, oh man, yes, that is correct. It's 99 times 99 times 99. So you have 99, so Suvan is the closest response. 0%. It feels like zero once you see the answer. So you have your first part that you put on the bike. There's a 99% chance it's good. So that's 0.99 success rate, or 0.99 odds of success. Then you take your next part, 0.99 odds of success. So you multiply those. You take the next part, 0.99. So you have 100 parts. By the time you have all your 100 parts put in the bike, you have a 36.6% chance of being defect-free. So roughly 2 out of 3 bikes that you make will be bad if you have only a 99% defect-free rate for each of the parts. That's pretty bad. But on the bright side, you can maybe sleep a little better at night knowing that, okay, maybe the defect was on the bell, so it won't bother them that much. But what if the defect is on the brake and they end up getting into a crash? You don't know exactly where the defect's going to be. So 99% is not good enough for a lot of manufacturing applications. And back in the day, before we had a lot of good statistical quality controls, you would just build more than you need and expect to scrap a lot. I saw a talk by a Boeing engineer that said when they would make Apache helicopter engines, if they got an order for 12 engines, they would build 14 because they knew 2 of them would go in the trash. That's a helicopter engine that you're putting in the trash. That's a lot of waste, and that gets passed on to the customers. So you have it's to everyone's benefit to control that early on. So there's this idea, I mentioned that you have if you're 99% successful at catching your mistakes, that's still not good enough. So every standard deviation from average that you try to go up is what a standard deviation is 1 sigma in math terms. So in the industry, you'll hear a lot of people talk about trying to achieve 6 sigma. So 1 sigma will capture 68% of everything. 2 sigma will capture like 93%, and then you go further and further. If we're at 99%, that's just below 4 sigma, but 6 sigma is where industry is usually aiming to be, to try to capture everything. But once you get past 3 sigma, you're really only trying to capture that last 0.1%. How much could that really matter? Well, going back to the bike, okay, let's try to bump up our quality control. If you go to 4 sigma, now if you can bump up 0.4% detection, then you go from 1/3 to a little over 1/2 of the bikes being good. Trying to go from 99 to 99.4 is probably painful, but hey, now we're at half. That's still not that great, all things considered. You go to almost 100%, 99.976 defect free, then we get to a 97% success rate. That's pretty good, but in a shop of 100 bikes, you're still going to have 2 duds on the wall. So it's not that great, but it's much better. 6 sigma, when you have 99.9997 defect-free parts, that's when we finally get to almost 100%. So this is on a small scale with 100 parts on a bike. Now think about building a car. According to Toyota, a typical car has 30,000 parts. So if each one of those is a chance for failure, you really, to make these large, complicated devices, you really need to have your process down to the last percentage. So in order to address that, you need to consider, what do I want my product to do, and what could go wrong in the process. And that helps you build your control process with the appropriate consideration of risk. Some other complicated things that you could build. This is the Da Vinci robot that actually performs surgery, is used to perform laparoscopic surgery. The surgeons, instead of standing over the patient, will be off to the side with a controller. And this other robot, you will probably hear more about at Mr. Wright's talk tomorrow. So I'll leave that to him. But we only have 5 minutes left, so I'll kind of speed through the last bit. But when you're designing something, in order to capture all the risk, first, what you need to do is define the product itself. So if you take a smartphone, for example, if you were to design a smartphone from scratch, what does it need to do? It needs to have a readable screen. Okay, but what does that mean? What resolution do we need? How many colors does it need? Is black and white okay? If not, like, do we need 256 colors? It has to respond to touch. How sensitive does it need to be? How quickly does it need to respond? Does it need to connect to 5G? Does it need to connect to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth? Does it need to hold a charge? How much battery charge does it need? All of these things need to be defined beforehand. And so even something simple, like I've seen a product that was basically like surgical scissors. The user requirements specification, aka the list of all these things that we want to see on the product, was like 10 pages for surgical scissors. So you need to really go into detail to think of all the possibilities. Then once you know what it's going to do, we need to define what could go wrong for each of those things and try to imagine all the different problems that we could have. So for each problem, how likely is it to happen and what could go wrong? What are the consequences if that happened? So let's say the touchscreen stops responding. Okay, well, maybe there's a medium risk of that happening. If your touchscreen stops, your phone becomes a brick. Okay, medium consequences. It's inconvenient for sure, but probably fixable. You're not harmed by that. What if the battery explodes? Okay, well, if the likelihood is low, maybe we don't need to worry about it that much. But what are the consequences? Severe. It exploded on your user. People will be injured. So the overall risk is high, even though the likelihood is low. So we put all of these things together into a big matrix for each product. And that combined is called the failure mode and effects analysis. And at least in medical devices, you need to be able to show this to the FDA every time you make a product. We have considered all the things that could go wrong with our product. And here's a list of all the ways that we address each of those risks based on how bad they are. With that, I know we're running short on time, so I'll just leave the last 2 minutes for questions.
I had a question going back to that statistics slide where you gave the example that, let's say you're like an experienced craftsman and you have like a 99% success rate. Now, looking at like the next slide over actually with the cumulative distribution function, I had a question, like, do people actually sit around like a statistician, let's say, and work with quality assurance engineers to ensure that the device has that much precision to it?
Yes, so I mentioned Six Sigma is the goal. That's actually the name of a whole series of certifications that you can get. So if in particular, if you want to go into quality engineering or manufacturing engineering, if you can get a certification for Six Sigma, that is a valuable resume booster because it shows that you understand the statistical tools to do this type of analysis. Usually there will be statistical specialists that are just dedicated to this within the organization. But not every organization will have them. It depends on what you're making. But it is definitely a useful tool to have in your toolbox. There are definitely people that get paid to do this full time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
In the case that like something does go wrong, or like so for example with the iPhone slide on the in the last two slides, if something does go wrong, what is the best way that like a company should address it?
That is a good question and very complicated. So typically there's a whole department in each company dedicated to complaint handling. And within medical devices in particular, there's a few different types of complaints, but if there is patient harm of some sort, that's usually a reportable event that the FDA has to get notified of. So every company has its own internal policies for how they handle that. They could have a dedicated investigation team that investigates every individual failure. They could have They could have some failures that they recognize already, like, oh, okay, this is this type of complaint. Well, we've dealt with this before. Here's a tree of different causes. Some of them are user error. So depending on the situation, if it's bad, they could do a voluntary recall. If it's something that maybe the user just needs to know about something, they could send out a notice to the customers, just making them aware of an issue. If the worst case scenario is the company doesn't do anything about it, and the FDA forces them to do something about it. But I've never been in a case where it gets to that point. Usually companies are very, very hyper aware of handling complaints in a timely manner. Yes, you have a lot of lawyers with technical backgrounds in risk management. Yeah, and product recall would be the last recourse. Usually you don't want to recall unless you have to, but if it looks like that is the best option, you really need to pull the trigger before you're forced to do it.
Thank you.
Hmm? What is my favorite thing about my career right now and why? That is a good question. I touched upon this a little bit on the organizational slide, but I really enjoy that I get to work with every team. So if I'm really not exaggerating when I say like I know everything that the company is doing, because it all has to get sterilized. So every R&D project comes to me at some point. Every product update comes to me at some point, and then I get to talk to the manufacturing folks to maintain routine manufacturing environments, make sure their manufacturing remains sterile. I get to talk to the regulatory team to help them with their submissions. So it's really interesting because I don't feel like I'm in a silo where I'm just working on this one product line. Because there are some people, if you really like doing deep work on just one product, then all the more power to you. But for me personally, I like seeing that variety and being able to touch a little bit of every project. How do you keep up with trends in your specialty? So that's a good question for sterilization in particular. There's probably only a few dozen sterilization specialists in the United States. It's a very small field. And for better or for worse, usually for better, everyone knows each other. Like there's a pretty good community of people that are active in the field that go to talks and hold talks. So different organizations like the AAMI, the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, or something like that. They hold a lot of seminars throughout the year. There's various technical trade groups that hold their own private conferences where they'll try to bring in subject matter experts to give talks to draw in the rest of the people from the field. And those are all great for keeping up with what's going on. So yeah, trying to just attend talks and keep in touch with other people in the industry. Any other questions?
Do you guys have any kind of internships or anything for the summers that the students could come to your company and?
Yeah. So Applied Medical used to have a high school summer internship, but I think that since then that program has become college only. I think that the high school, I don't work there anymore, but if I recall correctly, that became a 1-week summer workshop specifically for high school students. I'm not sure with COVID if that's still happening for this year, but I'll touch base, and if I can find more info, I'll definitely loop you guys in on that.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Thank you.
This is Mr. Cuenca. I'm the biotechnology instructor, and thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. I really appreciate this because this is really exciting for the students who are in biotechnology and engineering, because this is just the fusion, the interfacing of specialties and pathways. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to present and help students learn more about the different opportunities that are out there. I'm also very glad that pathway exists now. There's definitely a lot more freedom for students to pursue different interests compared to 10 years ago when I was a student.
No, thank you very, very much. On behalf of the whole school, I think this is one of the amazing ones. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I guess I'll hand it back over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Tomorrow we have another one with Mr. Wright. So please be in attendance. We'll be starting at 11 tomorrow. And I'm not really sure what is he going to talk about, but I think he's going to talk about Mars, right? The land world,
yes,
and all the beautiful things that we do up there. So it's going to be amazing too. 11 o'clock, same place, same time. All right.
Keep sending us invitation, because there is bio. Maybe they will study biotechnology in March. In Mars, right?
We bet you will.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna happen in March. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Do you get it? Do you get the one for tomorrow?
Well, I have to sometimes check on your Instagram page to get information. But this one, I really specially talked to Fernando about this to kind of invite us, because this is amazing. And yeah, in the future, and there's always a connection. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll include you, and then you choose, right? That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, have a great day.